Believing the sterile hum of an office can protect you from the shadows is the most dangerous illusion you can entertain. You walk those fluorescent-lit corridors, a labyrinth of cubicles and recycled air, thinking the only monsters are deadlines and difficult bosses, but the truth is far more visceral. The polished floors reflect more than just your tired face. They are a cracked mirror into a reality that seethes just beneath the surface. I have seen it in my visions, in the cold ashes of burnt-out ambitions, and the whispers that cling to the static of a forgotten conference call. The workplace is not a sanctuary. It is a harvesting ground, a place where souls are worn thin, where despair leaves a stain of dried blood on the carpet that no cleaning crew can ever remove. It is a stage for horrors that don't need the darkness of night to hunt. They hunt under the guise of professionalism, behind the plastic smiles of colleagues who are little more than hollowed-out effigies. You share coffee with them, you exchange pleasantries, but you never truly see what stares back from behind their eyes. The greatest terrors are not born in ancient crypts or abandoned asylums. They are cultivated in the mundane, in the relentless tick-tock of the corporate clock that measures not time, but the slow, methodical erosion of your spirit. Each day you leave a piece of yourself there, a phantom limb of energy that lingers in the break room, in the elevator, in the cold, empty chair you occupy. And some things that hunger for that energy find these places to be an irresistible feast, a banquet of quiet desperation. Tonight, we do not speak of ghosts in a distant mansion. We speak of the chilling presence that sits in the cubicle across from you, the one whose keyboard clicks with a rhythm that is not quite human. We pull back the veil on the familiar to reveal the festering wound beneath. These are not mere stories. They are echoes from beyond, omens, written in the steam of a forgotten coffee mug. I will share with you 4 visions, 4 instances where the mundane cracked open and showed the abyss lurking within the heart of the corporate machine. These are transmissions from the edge, carried on a cold draft that promises nothing but a persistent restlessness. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. What you learn here might be the only thing that gets you through another Monday. Let us begin with the tale of a man named Arthur, a soul so thoroughly beige that he blended into the fabric of the office like a watermark on cheap paper. He was an accountant, a dealer in the cold, hard logic of numbers, a profession that often builds the strongest walls against the unseen. His world was one of spreadsheets and balanced ledgers, a fortress of certainty. But the foundations of his fortress began to crack the day Alara was hired. She wasn't overtly strange, not at first. She was assigned the desk directly opposite him, a silent sentinel in his field of vision. She was efficient, quiet, and her smile never quite reached her eyes. It was a perfect porcelain mask that concealed something else. Arthur first noticed the cold. It was a peculiar, unnatural chill that seemed to emanate directly from her desk, a pocket of winter that defied the building's overzealous heating system. His coffee would grow lukewarm in minutes if he left it on the edge of his desk closest to her. He dismissed it, of course. A draft, a quirk of the ventilation. But then came the whispers. He'd be deep in concentration, the only sounds the soft hum of computers and the distant murmur of traffic, and he would hear his name. Arthur. It was a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement, a faint, sibilant breath that seemed to come from right behind his ear. Yet when he turned, there was only Alara, staring at her monitor, completely still. This is where everything changes for you, because you have felt this too, haven't you? That fleeting sensation of a presence, the cold spot in a warm room, the whisper that you dismiss as the wind. Arthur tried to rationalize it all. He was overworked, stressed. His mind was playing tricks on him, but the evidence began to mount, like dust settling on a forgotten tomb. He noticed that the small plant on his desk, the one his daughter had given him, began to wither on the side facing Alara. its leaves curling and turning black, as if touched by a chemical blight, while the other side remained defiantly green. The decay was a perfect line, an invisible border between his world and hers. It was an omen he could no longer ignore. The shadows under Alara's eyes grew deeper, yet she never seemed tired. In fact, she seemed to draw strength from the growing malaise of the office. Colleagues began complaining of splitting headaches, of a constant draining fatigue that no amount of caffeine could penetrate. Productivity dipped, and a strange paranoia began to set in. People started locking their desks, guarding their work with a new feral intensity. All the while, Alara's reports were flawless, her energy boundless. She was a black hole, and the rest of the office was her accretion disk, a swirling vortex of life force being slowly and methodically siphoned away into her silent, watchful darkness. Arthur saw it. He saw the correlation, a new kind of ledger where the debits were his colleagues' vitality and the credit was horror. He began to watch her, his methodical accountant's mind now repurposed for a more terrifying kind of audit. He noted she never ate or drank. Not once did he see her take a sip of water or unwrap a sandwich. She would sit in the break room during lunch, participating in the hollow ritual, but her hands never brought food to her lips. He watched her reflection in the dark glass of the conference room as she walked past. For a split second, a single, heart-stopping moment, he saw nothing. The glass reflected the hallway, the ficus plant, the water cooler, but where her form should have been, there was only empty space, a void in the shape of a woman. It was a glitch in reality, a crack in the mirror that showed the terrifying nothingness behind it. The fear became a physical thing for Arthur, a cold knot of dread in his stomach that no amount of logic could untie. He started staying late, pretending to work, but really, he was observing. He wanted to catch the mask slipping. One night, a brutal storm raged outside, trapping the last few of them in the building. The lights flickered, casting the office in a strobing, monstrous dance of light and shadow. The others packed up, eager to brave the weather rather than stay another minute in the oppressive atmosphere. Soon it was just him and Alara. The emergency lights cast a sickly green glow, turning the familiar space into a diseased alien landscape. She had not moved from her desk, her fingers still poised over her keyboard, though her monitor was black. A creaking door somewhere down the hall echoed like a breaking bone. The building's groans in the wind sounded like a dying beast. Arthur held his breath, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He watched Alara, her silhouette stark against the flashing lightning outside. Slowly, deliberately, she turned her head, her neck moving with a sickening, unnatural smoothness, like a doll's. Her eyes found his in the gloom, and for the first time, the porcelain mask was gone. What looked back at him was ancient, predatory, and utterly devoid of humanity. Her eyes were not eyes at all, but two pits of absolute darkness, swallowing the faint green light, and her mouth stretched into a smile that was impossibly wide, filled with shadows instead of teeth. The voice that whispers from the darkness is fed by every soul that joins this congregation. Subscribe, and let the shadows know you are listening. Arthur was paralyzed, pinned to his chair by a terror so profound it felt like a physical weight. The thing wearing Alara's skin did not move from its desk, but he felt its presence rush across the space between them, a wave of absolute cold that leached the warmth from his bones. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of ozone, and something else, something like cold ashes and damp earth. He could hear it now, not as a whisper, but as a chorus of voices inside his own mind, chittering, laughing, speaking in a language of pure dread that bypassed his ears and clawed directly at his sanity. They spoke of hunger. They spoke of the slow, sweet taste of fading ambition, of fear-spiced despair, of the delicious energy that bled from tired, overworked souls. This place, this office, was a battery farm, and Alara was the farmer. She wasn't just a parasite. She was a symptom of a deeper sickness, a manifestation of the building's own accumulated misery. He was staring into the face of the entity that had been causing the headaches, the fatigue, the paranoia. It was an intelligence born from the dregs of human emotion left behind day after day, and it had finally found a perfect vessel to walk among its herd. The smile widened, and the chittering in his head grew to a roar. He broke. Arthur, the man of numbers and logic, scrambled backward, his chair tipping over with a crash that was swallowed by a clap of thunder. He crawled, scrabbling at the carpet like a madman, his only instinct to get away from those abyssal eyes. He didn't look back. He fled into the storm-lashed night, leaving behind his briefcase, his coat, his life's work. He ran until his lungs burned, and the demonic laughter in his head faded to a dull, throbbing echo. The next day, Alara was gone. No one knew where she went. Her desk was wiped clean, as if she had never existed. But the chill in the office remained, a permanent stain on the atmosphere. Arthur never returned. He couldn't. How do you explain to human resources that you fled in terror from a soulless entity wearing your coworker's skin? Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Have you ever had a colleague who just seemed wrong? A person whose presence made the air feel thin and cold? Leave your testimony in the comments below. A confession whispered into the digital void. Arthur's story is a chilling omen, a warning that the most monstrous things often hide in the most mundane of packages. They don't need fangs or claws when they can drain you with a smile, when they can feed on your life force across the tops of cubicle walls. The workplace is a modern necropolis, and not everything buried there is dead. Some things are just waiting for the right vessel to rise again, and that brings us to our next vision, a place where the building itself was the predator. This next echo comes from a place of steel and glass, a skyscraper that pierced the clouds like a shard of a broken mirror. It was a monument to corporate ambition, a place called the Meridian Tower. But what the tenants of its upper floors didn't know was that the tower was built on a foundation of something far older and darker than concrete. It stood on land that once housed a notorious asylum, a place where the forgotten were left to scream into the void, their anguish soaking into the very soil. The developers ignored the whispers, the local legends. They buried the history under layers of steel and sanitized it with a fancy new name. But you cannot bury a wound that deep. It will always fester. Our witness to this festering wound was a man named Hector, a night watchman, a liminal figure, destined to walk the empty halls when the building was supposed to be sleeping. For him, the Meridian Tower was a different entity at night. The daytime bustle was a mask, a thin veneer of normalcy. When the sun went down and the last employee scurried home, the tower would breathe. He could feel it in the soles of his shoes, a low, almost subsonic hum that wasn't from the HVAC or the servers. It was the hum of something ancient, dreaming fitfully beneath him. He was a shepherd to a flock of empty offices, a silent guardian of secrets that were etched into the very drywall. The phenomena began subtly, as they always do. The faintest scent of antiseptic in hallways that had been cleaned hours ago. The sound of a single heavy footstep on the floor directly above him, even when he knew, with absolute certainty, that he was the only living soul within those walls. He would see motion at the edge of his vision in the security monitors, a fleeting shadow that would vanish the moment he focused on it. He documented it all in his logbook, a lonely chronicle of the tower's creeping madness. He tried telling his supervisor, a fat, complacent man who dismissed it as settling noises in an old building playing tricks on you. But Hector knew better. The building wasn't settling, it was waking up. Listen carefully, because this is crucial. The elevators were the tower's circulatory system, its veins and arteries, and it was in the elevators that the building's malevolence became undeniable. One night, Hector was on his rounds on the 22nd floor, a space that was currently vacant, a hollow cavern of echoing potential. He called the elevator, and as the doors slid open with a soft chime, he was hit by a blast of freezing cold air. The interior of the car was coated in a thin layer of frost, despite the mild autumn night. The control panel was dark, except for one button that glowed with a sickly, pulsating red light. It was the button for a floor that did not exist. It was labeled B4. The tower only had 3 basement levels. Against his better judgment, compelled by a force he couldn't name, part curiosity, part a dawning, terrible dread, he stepped inside. The doors slid shut with a sound like a crypt ceiling, and the car began to descend. It didn't move with the smooth, silent efficiency of a modern elevator. It shuddered and groaned, the cables screaming in protest as it plunged down, past B1, past B2, past B3, into a depth the blueprints said was nothing but solid earth and rock. The air grew thick, heavy with the smell of decay and forgotten sorrows. Hector's ears popped from the pressure, his heart hammering against his ribs. The glowing red B4 was the only light, bathing him in a hellish crimson glow. The elevator finally shuddered to a halt. For a long moment there was only silence, a profound, crushing stillness that was more terrifying than any sound. Then, with a horrible, scraping groan, the doors began to open. Hector wasn't looking at a parking garage or a storage level. He was staring into the long, dark corridor of a 19th century hospital ward. The walls were stained and peeling. The floor was grimy tile, and rusted iron bed frames lined the hallway, some still holding the vague stained shapes of mattresses. It was the asylum. The tower hadn't been built on it. It had been built around it. It had absorbed the old structure, preserving its misery like a fly in amber. A single, bare bulb flickered at the far end of the hall, casting dancing, grotesque shadows. And from that darkness, he heard it. A whisper, a chorus of faint, tormented whispers that slithered through the air, carrying the agony of 1,000 shattered minds. They spoke of cruel treatments, of endless days of a doctor whose name was a curse. They begged for release. They screamed in silent rage. They wept with a sorrow so deep it felt like it could drown the world. Hector was frozen, not by the cold, but by the sheer weight of the psychic residue that saturated this impossible place. He was an intruder in a mass grave of the spirit, a living man trespassing in a realm of perpetual torment. Then, a shape detached itself from the shadows at the end of the hall. It was tall and gaunt, clad in what looked like a doctor's coat from a bygone era, but the fabric seemed to be woven from the darkness itself. It had no face, only a smooth, pale oval where features should have been. But Hector felt its gaze upon him, a malevolent intelligence that recognized him as something warm, alive, and out of place. The faceless thing raised a long, spindly arm and pointed a finger directly at him. The whispers in the air coalesced into a single, piercing shriek that vibrated through the very metal of the elevator car. It was a sound of pure, undiluted madness, and it was meant for him. That shriek was the key that unlocked his paralysis. Hector slammed his hand against the door closest button, his mind screaming a silent prayer. The doors, which had opened with such agonizing slowness, now seemed to take an eternity to close. He could see the faceless doctor gliding toward him, moving without walking, its form growing larger, clearer, its featureless face a canvas for Hector's own burgeoning terror. The whispers clawed at his mind, trying to find purchase, trying to drag him out into the hall with them. The doors finally sealed shut just as the thing's shadowy fingers were inches away. and the last thing he saw was that smooth, blank face pressed against the small window, a horrifying parody of a curious observer. The elevator shot upward with a violent lurch, the ascent just as jarring and unnatural as the descent had been. It didn't stop until it reached the lobby, where the doors opened onto the familiar brightly lit marble floor. Hector stumbled out, gasping, his body trembling uncontrollably. He looked at the control panel inside the car. It was perfectly normal. There was no frost, no strange glow, and there was no button for B4. It was gone, as if it had never been there. He checked his logbook, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. His entry for the past 20 minutes was just a frantic, illegible scribble, a seismograph reading of a soul that had been shaken to its core. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Does the place you work have a history, a past that refuses to stay buried? Share your own whispers from the darkness in the comments. Hector finished his shift, a ghost in his own body, and quit the next morning. He never told anyone the full story, the truth of what lay sleeping in the belly of the Meridian Tower. But sometimes, on quiet nights, he can still hear that shriek in his dreams. He knows that the asylum is still there, a cancerous tumor in the heart of the city, and the souls trapped within are still whispering, still waiting for another curious soul to press the button for a floor that doesn't exist. The greatest horrors are not the ones that hunt you, but the ones you stumble into, the secret places where pain never dies. And this is where everything changes for you, because you must understand that not all conduits for darkness are people or places. Sometimes, the abyss finds its way into our world through an object, a thing of wood or paint or clay, imbued with a history so malignant it poisons everything it touches. These objects are like broken crosses, symbols of faith inverted into gateways for despair. They are brought into our sterile, controlled environments as decorations, as harmless trinkets, but they carry a plague within them. This is the story of such an object, and the sterile office it turned into a charnel house of ambition and sanity. It concerns a marketing firm, a place built on the shaky foundations of illusion and persuasion. The firm was called Innovate Solutions, a name as bland and meaningless as the motivational posters that adorned its walls. The catalyst for their ruin arrived on a Monday, carried in the arms of a young, ambitious graphic designer named Chloe. She had just returned from a trip to Eastern Europe, and she brought back a gift for the office. It was a painting, bought from a dusty antique shop in a city whose name was hard to pronounce. It was large and ornate, in a heavy, dark wood frame. The painting itself depicted a flock of crows, rendered in stark, unsettling detail, swarming in a blood-red sky above a barren, wintry field. It was morbid and beautiful, and it was immediately hung in the main conference room. The first week, it was a novelty. People commented on its dark aesthetic, joking that it perfectly captured the mood of a Monday morning meeting. But by the second week, the jokes had stopped. The painting seemed to watch. The crows, frozen in oil and pigment, appeared to shift and rearrange themselves when no one was looking directly at them. A person would glance up and swear there were 12 crows, then look again moments later and count 13. The sky in the painting seemed to deepen in color, its crimson hue growing more vibrant, almost wet-looking. After a particularly stressful or contentious meeting, it was as if the artwork was feeding on the negative energy of the room, a silent, painted parasite. Then the whispers of doom began to manifest in reality. The firm's biggest client, a lucrative account they had held for years, suddenly pulled their contract for no discernible reason, citing only a vague change in direction. The server crashed during a critical deadline, wiping out weeks of work. A star employee, a man who was the very picture of health, suffered a sudden massive heart attack in the middle of a presentation, collapsing right in front of the painting of the crows. The paramedics said it was an anomaly, a freak occurrence, but those in the room felt it, a chilling, predatory stillness that emanated from the canvas as the man lay dying on the floor. Chloe, the one who had brought the painting, was consumed by guilt and a creeping dread. She began to research its origins, spending her nights scouring obscure online forums and digital archives. What she found turned her blood to ice. The artist was a man who had been exiled from his village in the 1800s, accused of witchcraft and consorting with dark spirits. He was said to have a strange connection to crows, believing them to be messengers from the other side, psychopomps who feasted on the souls of the dying. His final work, before he vanished completely, was a large painting of crows in a red sky. Legend said he didn't use normal paint. He mixed the pigments with his own blood and the ashes of raven feathers. The painting wasn't just a depiction of doom, it was a conduit, a living curse. The artist had poured all of his bitterness, his rage, and his dark knowledge into the canvas, creating a relic that actively sowed discord and fed on the resulting misery. The crows were not merely painted figures, they were the eyes of the long-dead artist, extensions of his malevolent will. The red sky wasn't a sunset, it was a representation of the blood that had been spilled and the blood that was yet to come. The firm's run of bad luck was not a coincidence. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign of ruin, directed from beyond the grave by an artist whose masterpiece was human suffering. Every argument, every failure, every moment of despair made the red of the sky a little deeper, a little fresher. Chloe tried to convince her boss to get rid of the painting. She presented her research, her voice trembling as she spoke of curses and blood magic. Her boss, a man of pure, unadulterated pragmatism, laughed in her face. He called her hysterical, stressed, and suggested she take some time off. To him, the painting was an asset, an expensive piece of art. The firm's troubles were just a temporary downturn, a test of their resilience. He was a man staring into a cracked mirror, showing a monster, and all he could see was his own handsome, rational reflection. His refusal sealed their fate. That very night, a fire broke out in the server room. The official cause was faulty wiring, another freak accident. The fire gutted the entire floor. The smoke detectors failed to activate, and the sprinkler system malfunctioned. It was a blaze of unnatural intensity, as if fueled by something more than just office furniture and electronics. When the firefighters finally managed to subdue it, the conference room was a scene of utter devastation. Everything was reduced to charred, unrecognizable ruin. The long oak table was a skeleton of blackened wood. The expensive chairs were melted slag. The state-of-the-art projection system was a puddle of plastic. Everything was gone, except for the painting. It hung on the one wall the flames had not touched, pristine and undamaged. The frame was not even singed. The sight broke something in the survivors. It was undeniable proof, a chilling testament to the painting's unholy power. It had protected itself. The red sky on the canvas seemed to glow in the aftermath, more vibrant and alive than ever, as if it had absorbed the very essence of the destruction. The crows looked fat and satisfied. There were more of them now, definitely more. The firm collapsed shortly after. The financial losses, the loss of data, the psychological toll, it was too much. Innovate Solutions became another corporate ghost, its name a whisper on the winds of commerce. Chloe, haunted by what she had unleashed, was the only one who understood the truth. Every soul that joins feeds the voice that whispers from the darkness. By liking this transmission, you add your energy to the signal, allowing it to reach others who wander in the gray twilight. The painting was taken as evidence and locked away in a police storage facility. I have heard whispers that it has since vanished from the evidence locker, with no signs of a break-in. Sometimes I have a vision of it hanging in another conference room, in another city, It's crows watching a new group of ambitious souls, waiting patiently for the first argument, the first taste of fresh despair. It is a patient predator, and the corporate world is its endless hunting ground. A powerful reminder that evil can be bought and sold, and sometimes the price is far higher than what is written on the tag. But what if the horror is not an external force, not a parasitic coworker, a haunted building, or a cursed object? What if the horror is something closer, something more intimate? What if it wears the face of someone you trust, someone you see every single day? Our final vision is perhaps the most disturbing, for it deals with the concept of the double, the doppelgänger, a folk tale to some, a psychological phenomenon to others, but to those who have witnessed it, it is a terrifying, soul-shredding reality. It is the ultimate violation, the realization that the person you know has been copied, and the copy is not perfect. It is a hollow thing, a cracked mirror image, with something vital missing from behind the eyes. This story comes from a small, tight-knit architecture firm. The witness is a woman named Isabel, and the subject is her co-worker and friend, a man named Marcus. They had worked together for over a decade, sharing a bond forged in late nights, impossible deadlines, and endless pots of coffee. Isabel knew Marcus better than she knew her own brother. She knew his habits, his humor, his tells. She knew the way he always tapped his pen when he was thinking, the specific sigh he used when frustrated, the crinkle at the corner of his eyes when he gave a genuine smile. It was this intimate knowledge that made what happened next so utterly terrifying. It began on a Tuesday morning. Isabel was walking toward the office kitchen when she saw Marcus standing by the water cooler, his back to her. She called out his name, but he didn't turn around. He just stood there, perfectly still, staring at the blank wall in front of him. A cold prickle of unease ran down her spine. It was just odd. She walked past him into the kitchen, and as she was filling her mug, Marcus walked in from the main office entrance, shrugging off his coat and complaining about the traffic. Isabel froze, her mug halfway to the coffee pot. She stared at him, then whipped her head around to look back at the water cooler. The space was empty. The man who had been standing there, the man she would have sworn on her life was Marcus, was gone. She tried to rationalize it. A trick of the light. Someone who looked like him from behind. But the feeling of wrongness lingered, a cold residue in the air. She asked Marcus if he had just been at the water cooler. He gave her a strange look and said no, he'd just walked in the door. He laughed it off, but Isabel couldn't. Over the next few weeks, the glitches in reality became more frequent and more overt. She would see Marcus at his desk, deep in concentration, then turn to see him walking down the hall toward the restrooms. She'd get an email from him, only to have him walk over moments later and ask her about the very thing he'd supposedly just emailed. Each time she would confront the real Marcus, and each time he would have a perfectly logical explanation. He hadn't been at his desk. She must have seen someone else. His email must have been delayed in the server. He was gaslighting her without even knowing it. His own placid ignorance, a weapon against her fraying sanity. She started to doubt herself, to wonder if she was losing her mind. But what the stars don't tell you openly is that your intuition is an ancient organ of survival. It recognizes patterns the conscious mind dismisses, and Isabel's intuition was screaming that something was fundamentally broken. The problem wasn't with her, it was with Marcus, or rather with the other Marcus. The copy was imperfect. It was a poorly rendered imitation. Isabel noticed the tiny details that were off. The doppelganger never blinked. Its movements were just a little too smooth, a little too deliberate. It wore Marcus's clothes. It had Marcus's face, but it lacked his spark, his life. Its eyes were like the eyes of a taxidermied animal, glassy, vacant, and utterly without a soul. It never spoke, it only observed. And its smile was the most terrifying thing of all. It was a perfect physical imitation of Marcus's smile, but it held no warmth. It was the smile of a predator that has successfully infiltrated the herd, a mask of flesh pulled taut over a chilling, inhuman emptiness. The climax arrived during a late-night work session. A major project deadline loomed, and the office was a hive of frantic activity. Isabel was exhausted, running on fumes and caffeine. She went to the restroom to splash some cold water on her face. As she stood there, staring at her own tired reflection in the large mirror over the sinks, she saw him, the doppelganger. It was standing in the doorway behind her, reflected in the glass. It was just standing there, watching her with that dead, glassy-eyed stare. Her blood ran cold. She didn't dare turn around. Then, the real Marcus called her name from the hallway. "Isabel, you in there?" In the mirror, she saw the real Marcus appear in the doorway, right behind the doppelganger. For a terrifying schizophrenic moment, she was looking at both of them, superimposed. The real Marcus, looking concerned and alive, and the copy, a silent, hollow effigy standing in the exact same space. The real Marcus couldn't see it. He looked right through it as if it wasn't there. He took a step into the restroom, and his body passed through the doppelganger's. For a split second they merged, and in that instant, the reflection of the doppelganger turned its head and looked directly at Isabel in the mirror, and it smiled that terrible, cold, knowing smile. Do you feel this dark message was meant for you? Have you ever seen something that simply should not be, a glitch in the fabric of your perceived reality? Confess it to the darkness of the comments section. That image shattered the last remnants of Isabel's composure. She let out a choked scream and fled, pushing past the real, bewildered Marcus, and ran out of the office, out of the building, and out of that life. She never went back. She quit via a terrified, rambling email and moved to another state, trying to outrun the memory of that soulless, smiling reflection. But the vision haunts her. She doesn't know what that thing was, or what it wanted. Was it a harbinger, a psychic projection, or was it something far worse? Was it a replacement? A slow, methodical process of overwriting a person, one glitch at a time, until the original is completely erased, and only the hollow copy remains. She sometimes finds herself looking up Marcus on social media, driven by a morbid compulsion. He looks happy. He got a promotion. He's married now. But when Isabel looks at the photos, at his smiling face, she feels nothing but a profound, chilling cold. She can't see the man she knew. All she can see are the dead, glassy eyes of the thing that stood behind him in the mirror. A perfect copy, walking, talking, and living a life that no longer belongs to it. The most terrifying monsters are the ones that steal not your life, but your identity, leaving you a forgotten ghost while they wear your skin. And so, the visions fade, leaving us in the quiet hum of our own realities, forever tainted by the echoes of what we have heard tonight. The stories of Arthur, Hector, Chloe, and Isabel are not just tales to invoke a cheap thrill. They are warnings. They are broken crosses planted at the edge of a poisoned field. They remind us that the mundane world we navigate every day is a thin, fragile crust over an abyss of profound and ancient strangeness. Your office, that place of calculated logic and predictable routine, is one of the most vulnerable points in this crust. It is a place where human energy, hope, fear, ambition, despair is concentrated, creating a psychic beacon that draws things from the shadows. Think about it. Think of the ghosts of past projects, the phantoms of failed careers that haunt the server rooms. Think of the emotional residue left in a conference room after a brutal round of layoffs, a stain of misery far more permanent than any coffee spill. These energies accumulate, they curdle, and sometimes they gain a form of consciousness. Sometimes they manifest as a chill in the air, sometimes as a fleeting shadow in a security monitor, and sometimes they find a vessel, a new employee who doesn't seem quite right, a cursed object disguised as art, or a building that remembers the screams of those who died within its foundation. The corporate world is a grand, unintentional magical rite, and we are all unwitting participants. So the next time you are working late, and the building groans around you, do not be so quick to dismiss it as the wind. When you feel a sudden, inexplicable chill, do not blame the air conditioning. When you see a flicker of movement at the edge of your vision, do not assume it is just your tired eyes playing tricks on you. The veil is thinner than you think, especially in these places where so many souls are worn down to their very foundations. Be watchful, be aware, question the reflections in the polished surfaces, listen to the whispers that hide in the static of a poor connection. Your survival, your sanity, may depend on acknowledging the horror that hides in plain sight. The greatest mistake is to believe you are safe. Safety is an illusion, a comforting lie we tell ourselves between one heartbeat and the next. The universe is a vast, cold, and deeply weird place, and its strangeness is constantly bleeding through the cracks of our reality. The fluorescent lights of your office do not ward off the darkness. They merely cast longer, deeper shadows, and in those shadows, things are stirring. They are hungry, they are patient, and they see you. They see you sitting at your desk, bathed in the pale blue light of your monitor, and they see a flickering candle, a warm and inviting meal in the cold, endless dark. Look up from your screen. Look at the coworker across from you. Are you sure you know what's looking back? Until the next whisper from the void, walk carefully in the light, but always be aware of the shadows you cast. They are never truly empty.